The Silmarillion is infamously dense and complicated, but today I'm going to make it simple. Well, as simple as any 300-page history fantasy book can be. So while my conspiracy board is still out from my last conspiracy board video, I thought that I would lock you all down in my basement again and try and explain the Silmarillion to you as fast as possible while also having it make sense. I'm shooting for 30 minutes, but I don't know if that's gonna happen. So get yourself ready for a lot of geologically improbable events, oaths gone wrong, and names that start with F, because today we are going to try and explain the Silmarillion in 30-ish minutes. Ideally, as I set it up, the board will end up being pretty intuitive to you guys, but for context, this is where I'm gonna put the names of the chapters, so you can track along with that. The rest you're on your own and you're gonna have to figure out. But with that, let's get into it. Before there was anything else in the universe, there was Eru, aka Iluvatar, the One God, and the first thing that he created was the Ainur, a group of spirits. And they sang the music of the Ainur, a big group number which sounded really awesome until the Ainu Melkor got a little bit cocky. Melkor was the most powerful of the Ainu spirits, but also the most proud, and he wanted to sing his own song, which began to clash with the pre-existing symphony. However, Eru was able to use Melkor's discord to enrich the overall music, and by the time the song had ended, Eru had proved that there was nothing that Melkor could do that would be outside of Eru's larger universal plan. But Eru then revealed to the Ainur that the song that they had just sang would manifest into physical creation as a whole, with Melkor's discord included being a thread of evil that would weave through all of time and space. Many of the Ainur decided to stay in heaven with Iluvatar, but some chose to descend into physical creation, and they became known as the Valar. We have Manwë, who is similar in power to Melkor and closest to the heart of Iluvatar, Varda, the Lady of the Stars and partner to Manwë, Ulmo, the Lord of the Waters, Aule, the Lord of all physical substances and a craftsperson, Yavanna, who is Aule's wife who looks after green growing things, Mandos, the Keeper of the Houses of the Dead, the wife of Mandos, Vaire, who is the Weaver of Time, Lorien, the Master of Visions and Dreams, his partner Este, the Healer of Hurts, Nienna, the Mourner, Tulkas, the Fighter, his wife Nessa, who runs with the deer, Orome, the Hunter, and his wife Vana, the Ever Young. The Valar were the most powerful of the Ainur to descend, but they were followed by less powerful spirits, including the Maiar, which primarily consist of Ose and Melian for the purposes of these stories, the Lord of the Shores and the Gardener of Irmo. And then in terms of bad guys, we have Melkor, who is akin to the Valar in power, and then we have his armies of Balrogs, which are technically Maiar spirits that he corrupted, and then also Sauron, who was a Maiar spirit training under Aule before the corruption of Melkor. When they arrived in physical creation, they fought the First War, and all it took was one serious threat of a one-on-one fight from Tulkas to send Melkor scrambling for the hills. While Melkor brooded and established his fortress of Autumno in what would one day become Middle-earth, the Valar set to shaping the world. Aule and Varda worked together to create two lamps that would illuminate all of the world in perpetual day, but when they rested from all of their activity of shaping the world, Melkor struck and destroyed the two lamps, thereby ending that first period of time, which is called the Spring of Arda. In retaliation, the Valar would split the world in two with a great ocean, creating two continents, Aman over here, which they would settle, and Middle-earth over here, which Melkor would settle. The Valar created the city of Valmar to live in, and Yavanna and Nienna worked together to grow the two trees of Valinor, a gold and a silver tree, which would illuminate the world, and thus began the Days of Bliss. Meanwhile, Aule was getting a little bit excited because Eru had told them about the men and elves that were to come, and he wanted to try and make his own version, so he created dwarves, but he immediately realized that this was a huge mistake and that it was a very prideful action, and he threw himself down before God and apologized, and he raised up his hammer to smite the dwarves and kill them, but Eru halted his hand and decided that since Aule was repentant, they would allow the dwarves to live, but they would bury them underground so that they could wake after the elves and men. Now, Yavanna was getting a little bit nervous about this because now this was another creature that would make use of her natural world to fuel their industry, and so she went to Eru and she asked if she could have something to protect her forests, and Eru allowed her to awaken the spirits of trees, which created Ents. Middle-earth lay mostly abandoned during this time, and Melkor and Sauron were able to build their power. The elves awoke under Varda's starlight, and there Orome found them while hunting, and he taught them everything that he knew. However, Melkor also found them, and he kidnapped some of the elves, twisting them into what we now know as orcs. In order to protect the elves, all of the Valar came over and initiated the Battle of the Powers, in which they raided Autumno and took Melkor back in chains to be left in the halls of Mandos imprisoned. Startled by the presence of the Valar, the elves were unsure if they wanted to follow Orome over to Valinor, and so they sent 3 ambassadors to check it out and see if everything was cool. Ingwe, the king of the Vanyar elves, Finwë, the king of the Noldor elves, and Elwë, king of the Teleri elves. These 3 went over to Valinor, checked it out, decided it was pretty good, and then came back to report and bring everyone over, beginning the Great Migration of the elves. The Vanyar elves and the Noldor elves happily traveled over to Aman, but the Teleri lingered a bit, and some stayed behind, becoming known as the Sindar elves. One of the elves who stayed behind was Elwë, better known as Thingol, and while he was in Middle-earth, he met the Maiar, Melian, and the two fell so quickly in love that they literally stood there for 200 years making eye contact when they first saw each other. Talk about love at first sight. Either way, the Teleri elves couldn't find Thingol during this time, so they left. However, when they came to the shore, the Teleri elves fell in love with the sea, and they decided not to cross over with the Vanyar and the Noldor yet. Melian and Thingol would decide to make their home in Beleriand, which is what this region was now called, specifically in the forest of Doriath. Ulmo came back for the Teleri elves, but they said that they would only cross over if he allowed them to live on an island in the middle of the ocean for a while, which he did. Meanwhile, the Vanyar elves became very close to the Valar. The Teleri eventually crossed over, but they would stay on the shores and learn shipbuilding from Osse, whereas the Noldor elves would learn a lot from Aule. The Noldor king Finwë would go on to have 3 very important sons. We have Fëanor, who was the strongest in spirit, Fingolfin, who was physically the strongest, and we have Finarfin, who was the fairest, who I also forgot to write a name tag for, and so he gets a handwritten one. Fëanor would have 7 sons, Fingolfin would have 4 kids, and Finarfin would have 5 kids, which also included Finrod and Galadriel. Thus, they entered the noontide of the Blessed Realm, in which Melkor, with the help of Nienna, pleaded his case and was unchained and allowed to walk freely in Valinor, and Melkor decided to start befriending the Noldor elves particularly, which was a huge success, except Fëanor, who did not like Morgoth. Fëanor, who had been trained by Aule, created 3 gems, which were so beautiful that they captured the light of the 2 trees of Valinor, and he called these Silmarils. And Varda blessed the Silmarils so that if anyone touched them with impure intent, they would be burned by touching them. And everyone loved these gems, but Melkor in particular wanted to have them. Melkor began spreading rumors among the Noldor elves that the reason that they had been rushed out of Middle-earth was not for their safety, but because they wanted to make room for the far superior men to take over Middle-earth, leaving the elves with nothing. And although Fëanor did not like Melkor still, this did get to him, and he began building his own army and arming his own army. Finwë called a council to discuss Fëanor's actions, where Fingolfin said that they needed to put Fëanor in his place before he did anything rash. Fëanor responded by threatening to kill his own brother, and the two were rushed before Manwë to get a lecture. Manwë uncovered the fact that Melkor was the one causing all of these problems, and so he let them off kind of easy, except that he banished Fëanor to a different place until 12 years had passed, or until Fingolfin decided it was okay for him to come back. Tulkas went looking for Melkor but found him gone, because Melkor had already gone to the south of Aman to look for the primordial spirit Ungoliant, and the two of them began hatching a plan together. The Valar hosted a huge feast in Valmar, and Manwë demanded that Fëanor come because he wanted to help mend the relationship between Fëanor and his brother. Fingolfin very generously ended Fëanor's banishment early, but Fëanor was still pretty unhappy about the whole thing. With their guard down because they were all partying, Melkor and Ungoliant struck, killing and draining the 2 trees of Valinor, and Arda was plunged into darkness. Yavanna asked Fëanor for the Silmarils because those might be able to heal the 2 trees and restore the light, but Fëanor said no. And upon returning home, Fëanor realized that Melkor had already come through and taken the Silmarils and killed his father, and was now fleeing north. It was then that Fëanor renamed Melkor Morgoth, which means the Black foe. It was at this point that Morgoth also realized why people typically don't make deals with primordial spider creatures, as Ungoliant chased him up north and across the Hellcrox ice bridge because she wanted to eat the Silmarils. They managed to make it over before Ungoliant attacked Morgoth, and when she did, he screamed so loudly that his Balrogs were able to come save him, and Ungoliant scuttled off to the south to go breed and have babies that would become spiders like Shelob. Morgoth settled in his secondary fortress of Angband and began rebuilding his power, setting the Silmarils in a massive iron crown and raising up the mountains of Thangorodrim to protect his fortress. Feanor, meanwhile, was on a tear. He declared himself the new king of the Noldor, and he demanded that they all pack up and leave with him to head back to Middle-earth, and he swore an oath that he and his sons would not rest until they had reclaimed all of the Silmarils, no matter who they had to fight. Many of the Noldor were swayed and went with him, but they ran into a bit of a problem because they didn't have any boats, so they went down to the Teleri elves and asked for boats, but the Teleri elves said no because they thought that it was a pretty bad idea for them to leave in the first place, and so Feanor killed a lot of the Teleri elves, and this was called the First Kinslaying. Mandos warned Feanor that this was going way too far, but Feanor was far too gone to care, so he tried to take his elves over to Middle-earth, but they encountered another problem, which was that they didn't have enough boats. And so Feanor left most of the people and took the boats and his most trusted men and his sons over to Middle-earth, leaving them behind. They thought he was going to send the boats back, but the second he hit the shore, he burns all of the boats just because he's kind of a jerk. Enraged, Fingolfin decides to take him and his family across the ice bridge, and many of them are killed in this journey. Meanwhile, the Sindar elves who are left behind are settling Middle-earth. They make alliances with the dwarves, and Thingol and Melian commission the underground fortress of Menegroth from them. Morgoth begins sending down orcs, wolves, and other monsters to test their strength, and so Thingol begins building an army, and Melian creates a circle of magical protection called the Girdle of Melian. Back in Valinor, the Valar cooks a single fruit and flower from the mostly dead 2 trees of Valinor, and they set those up in vessels in the sky as the sun and moon, so light returns to the world, and they also set up a huge range of mountains that hides Valinor from the rest of the world. The sunlight wakes up men in Middle-earth, and they're pretty much like elves, except that they have the gift of Iluvatar, which means that they have completely free will, which also means that they die, whereas elves are functionally immortal. Feanor and his sons make it over to Middle-earth, where they are immediately attacked by Morgoth, but they're a little bit stronger than Morgoth expected them to be, and they're able to press back until they are directly raiding Angband, because Feanor wants to get the Silmarils back. However, he was a little bit cocky, and he is mortally wounded by Gothmog, the largest Balrog. His sons take his body to safety, he makes them promise to fulfill their oath that they would reclaim the Silmarils, and then he dies and is immediately consumed in flames because he's that hot-headed. Feanor's sons travel south, and Morgoth approaches them, offering a Silmaril in exchange for peace. However, most of them know that this is a trick, and only one of Feanor's sons, the oldest, Maedhros, is willing to go treat with Morgoth, even though he's planning on pulling a thing. However, as soon as he meets up with Morgoth, he is kidnapped and taken for ransom, and they hang him up by his wrist on the mountains of Thangorodrim. When Fingolfin and the survivors of his Noldor elves make it over to Middle-earth, Fingolfin is not interested in helping any of the sons of Feanor for obvious reasons, but one of Fingolfin's sons is sympathetic to their cause, and he goes and rescues Maedhros. However, he's not able to get him off of the mountain, and so the son of Fingolfin begs the Valar for help, and Manwë sends over a giant eagle to save both of them from Thangorodrim and bring them both to safety. When Maedhros returns safely, he goes and begs for Fingolfin's forgiveness, and Fingolfin forgives him and makes him the king of the Noldor. They talk to Thingol, but Thingol does not like or trust them, but he does allow them to all settle east of Doriath in the regions above and around his kingdom. They all start to get settled, and 30 years later, Turgon, the son of Fingolfin, and Finrod both have dreams of Ulmo telling them that they need to build secret cities. Finrod visited Menegroth with his sister Galadriel, where he got inspiration to start building his hidden city of Nargothrond. Galadriel, however, stayed, learning a lot of things from Melian. Turgon is guided by Ulmo to a secret valley where he then begins building his hidden city of Gondolin. Morgoth attacks the Noldor, but they push him back, and that triggers them to begin the Siege of Angband, which is going to last for 400 years. Galadriel is talking to Melian, and Melian begins to get more information out of her, and she and Thingol are able to put together the information about the kinslaying, which they had not been told about previously. And Thingol reinstates his grudge against the Sons of Feanor, forgives some of the other Noldor, but he does ban the native tongue of the Noldor, Quenya, which means that Sindarin, the language of the Sindar elves, becomes the dominant elven tongue in Middle-earth. Once Nargothrond was established, Galadriel went to go visit her brother, where she asked him why he wasn't married yet, and he responded by saying that he had a premonition that one day he was going to make a vow, and that vow would get him killed before he was able to have any children. And at that point, I wonder why you would start making any vows at all, but I guess that's just me. Fingolfin's daughter Aradel leaves Gondolin and gets kidnapped by the dark elf Eol. The two of them have a son named Maeglin, and when this son grows up, the two of them escape and begin making their way back to Gondolin. Eol is really evil, and he follows them back to Gondolin, where he is captured, and they're going to kill him until Aradel points out that that is the father of her child, and so they offer Eol the choice to either stay in Gondolin forever or die. And in response, Eol throws a spear at his son Maeglin, but it is blocked by Aradel, who dies. Eol is then thrown off a cliff and executed, and Maeglin is left alive, but he always kind of has a dark spot in his heart. One day, while out hunting, Finrod stumbles across a clan of men, and he wins them over by playing them elvish music. They inform him that the men are being chased further and further west by Morgoth's attacks. Finrod helps these men to settle on the borders of Doriath, but some of them follow him back towards Nargothrond, and they become known as the Edain, or the Elf Friends. Fingolfin begins rallying an army to strike out at Morgoth, but the Noldor are dragging their feet, and in that time, Morgoth initiates an attack, which is called the Battle of Sudden Flame. It is a brutal ambush led by the dragon Glaurung, and it ends the 400-year siege of Angband and slaughters many elves and men. Finrod's life is only saved by the elf friend Barahir, a human man, and so Finrod swears that someday he will repay the favor to Barahir. He has made a vow. When news of the destruction reaches Fingolfin, he goes absolutely mad and charges up to Angband alone to challenge Morgoth to hand-to-hand, weapon-to-weapon combat. Although Fingolfin manages to get some really good blows in at Morgoth, and Morgoth will limp for the rest of his life, Fingolfin is killed by Morgoth. Two human men, Huor and Hurin, are saved by the Valar, who send an eagle to come rescue them and take them to Gondolin for healing. But when time comes to leave Gondolin, Maeglin corners them and makes them swear to never share the location of Gondolin with anyone. Barahir stays up north fighting off orcs with a band of outlaws, but he and his outlaws are betrayed, and all of them are killed except for his son Beren. Beren wanders the wasteland for a while, but then he wanders south into Doriath, where he encounters the daughter of Melian and Thingol, the ever-beautiful Luthien. The two fall instantly in love, but Thingol will not permit their relationship unless Beren proves himself by going up to Angband and stealing a Silmaril from the crown of Morgoth himself. This is obviously a death mission, but Beren is too love-struck, and so he decides to take the quest on. He goes and gets the help of Finrod first, because Finrod swore a vow to his father, Barahir. They're captured by Sauron, where Finrod is killed trying to save Beren, but Luthien realizes that her Beren is in trouble, so she breaks out of Doriath. As she's leaving, she gets captured by Celegorm and Curufin, the sons of Feanor. She only escapes with the help of their super dog Huan. Huan faces Sauron and his werewolves head to head and kills all of them, including wrestling with Sauron in wolf form and defeating him. Luthien and Beren disguise themselves and use a spell to put everyone in Angband to sleep, and they make their way to Morgoth's throne room, where Luthien hypnotizes him with a song and dance, and he falls asleep. Beren is able to pry a Silmaril from the crown, but he gets a little bit greedy and he goes in for another one. And while doing this, this wakes up Morgoth, and so they have to flee, but they are stopped by Carcharoth, the guard wolf. Carcharoth bites off the hand that Beren was holding the Silmaril with, but the pain of the Silmaril burning in his stomach sends him into a madness. Beren, Luthien, and Huan manage to make their way safely back to Doriath, where Thingol decides that he finally approves of Beren and the two are allowed to be married. However, Carcharoth, still mad, is attacking their borders, and so they send out a hunting party to chase him down. They're able to take down Carcharoth and reclaim the Silmaril. However, Huan and Beren are killed, and when Luthien hears this news, she dies of grief. Luthien's soul goes to Mandos, where she sings a song and pleads her case, and Mandos grants her a very rare chance to go back with the soul of the human Beren. But Luthien must live a mortal life with him. She takes this choice, and the two get to live together a mortal life. News of their quest spreads, and it makes Morgoth look weak, and so Maedhros takes this opportunity to gather an army and strike at Morgoth. However, he doesn't exactly have the best public relations with people, so he can't gather a very large army, and it seems like all hope is lost as they approach the gates of Angband, but then Turgon comes in with an army 10,000 strong from Gondolin as a surprise support for the attack. However, this did end up being a terrible disaster. It's called the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, and although none of the sons of Feanor died in this particular battle, they were scattered, and many elves and men died. And Hurin, who had been previously in Gondolin, ended up being captured by Morgoth. Morgoth demanded that Hurin lead him to Gondolin, and when Hurin refused, he curses him and his entire bloodline. And then he puts Hurin up on a tall mountain, gives him the eyes and ears of a god so that he can watch the destruction of his children even from that mountaintop. Morgoth grants Hurin's land to the Easterlings. His wife Morwen is forced to send their son Turin to Doriath for safety. It is there alone that she gives birth to her and Hurin's daughter Nienor, and although she's getting word from Turin that it's safe to come over, she refuses because she's too proud. Turin is adopted and raised by Thingol, but one day when he's being mocked by one of Thingol's courtiers, he accidentally kills that courtier, and he thinks he's going to be banished, so he flees. Even though Thingol sends his friend Beleg with word that he's not actually banished, Turin refuses to head home and instead leads a band of outlaws to kill orcs. He manipulates the petty dwarf Mim to allow him and his men to live in Mim's home, and they are joined by Beleg, where they have a merry couple of years running around killing orcs. However, Mim, who is bitter because they killed his son, betrays them to the orcs, and the orcs come in and kill all of their men except for Turin and Beleg. Turin is taken prisoner by the orcs, and Beleg chases after him, where he encounters a former prisoner of war, Gwyndor, who is an elf. He and Gwyndor go and rescue Turin from the orcish camp, but in the dark, after he's been rescued, my light just went out. However, in the dark, Turin confuses Beleg for an orc and ends up killing him. Turin follows Gwyndor back to Nargothrond, where he falls in love with Finduilas, who is Gwyndor's ex-girlfriend, and also becomes a military advisor to the king. And at this point, he begins pushing for a more aggressive military policy than they had previously adopted. This backfires, and Morgoth sends out an army to attack them, led by Glaurung, and with his last breath, Gwyndor asks Turin to go back and rescue Finduilas. However, when he's on his way back, he's stopped by Glaurung, who hypnotizes him and tells him that his sister and his mother are in danger, and he needs to go and rescue them. So Turin completely abandons Nargothrond and Finduilas and goes to rescue them. What he doesn't realize is that Morwen and Nienor had already left for Doriath, so they are not there when he arrives, and so he goes back to go and try and find Finduilas to save her. However, by the time he gets back, Finduilas is already dead, and Turin falls into despair. He changes his name and his identity again, he joins a new band of men fighting against orcs, and he swears off violence for the time being. His mother Morwen and his sister hear about what happened to Nargothrond, and so they go out to try and find Turin, but they are stopped along the way by Glaurung, who sends Morwen's horse running, and he erases Nianor's memories and sends her out into the forest with no idea of who she is. It's there that Nienor and Turin meet for the first time, and not realizing that they're siblings, they fall in love, and Nienor becomes pregnant. Glaurung attacks his land, and so Turin takes back up his sword to go and kill Glaurung, and although he deals a mortal blow to Glaurung, Glaurung knocks him unconscious. Nienor arrives to find Turin dead, he seems dead at least, and Glaurung uses his last breath to restore her memories and allow her to see what she has done with her brother. So she throws herself off a cliff and ends her life. Turin wakes up, finds out about this, and throws himself on his own sword in his grief, and the doom of the children of Húrin is complete. This means that Húrin is finally able to be released, and he wanders around destitute for a while until he comes across Morwen on the grave of his children, and it is on the grave of his children that Morwen dies in his arms. He goes to the ruins of Nargothrond and finds a sick sword, and he brings the sword back to Thingol and Melian. There, they heal his mental issues, and so he gives them the sword, and then he wanders off to go die alone. All this time, I have had the Silmaril up with Luthien and Beren, but the Silmaril has been with Thingol this whole time. I'm so sorry. Thingol now has a Silmaril and a really sick sword, and he wants to combine the two, so he goes and talks to the dwarves and gives them these things so that they can put the Silmaril on the sword. However, the dwarves, while working with the Silmaril, are like, hey, I think this thing is pretty sick, and so when Thingol comes to get the sword with the Silmaril on it, they try to not give it to him, and so they kill Thingol, and also Thingol's men kill them, and it's this whole big kerfuffle. The sword is brought back to Melian, but she is far too sad to do anything with it, so she gives it to the captain of her guard, and then she returns to Valinor for good. The dwarves are still pretty mad that Thingol was planning on not paying them, and so they launch an attack on Doriath and on Menegroth, and they completely take it over because it's in such disarray without Thingol or Melian. Luthien and Beren catch word of this, and so Beren brings their son Dior to Menegroth with an army of elves and ents, and they drive the dwarves out of Menegroth. Beren takes the sword with the Silmaril back to Luthien, and Dior takes over ownership of Menegroth, and he gets married and has a child named Elwing. When Beren and Luthien eventually die, they send the sword to Dior, so now he has the Silmaril. Now, the sons of Feanor catch wind that the people in Menegroth have the Silmaril, and they are not particularly happy about this, so they launch an attack on Doriath. This is called the Second Kinslaying, and in it, Celegorm, Curufin, and Dior are all killed. Only Elwing survives, and she takes the Silmaril and runs to safety. The brother of Húrin, Huor, has a son named Tuor, who is raised kind of in exile, but he's then given a dream by Ulmo that he needs to go to Gondolin and speak some sense into Turgon. He finds his way to Gondolin, where he reminds Turgon that Ulmo told him a while ago that they need to clear out of Gondolin and head back to Valinor if they want to stay safe. Turgon is far too proud to listen to this advice. He doesn't want to abandon his city, but instead he just seals it up very tightly in the hopes that that will protect them. Tuor has made an enemy of Maeglin though, because Tuor falls in love with Idril, who is Maeglin's longtime crush. Tuor and Idril have a son named Earendil, but when he is only 7 years old, Morgoth sends a force of, dragons, orcs, balrogs, the usual, to attack Gondolin, and the city is completely decimated. Tuor goes to find his wife and son, but Maeglin has made it there first, and so Tuor has to kill Maeglin, and then he, his wife, and his son are able to lead the survivors out of Gondolin through a secret entrance that Idril had built. Tuor, Idril, and Earendil end up meeting up with Elwing, and they create a new settlement together, and the kingship of the Noldor is passed on to the elf Gil-galad. Meanwhile, Tuor and Idril get on a boat and pass to the west, never to be seen again. Elwing and Earendil fall in love and have 2 sons named Elros and Elrond, who are both half-elven. Earendil befriends Círdan the shipwright, who helps Earendil build a really sick ship with which he goes sailing west often, looking for help from the Valar, but also looking for his parents. While Earendil is out at sea, Maedhros catches wind of where the Silmaril is, and so he takes some of his brothers to go and try and take the Silmaril back. And when diplomacy fails, he commits the third kinslaying. This is regarded as the most cruel and brutal of the kinslayings. Many of them are killed, Elros and Elrond are kidnapped, and Elwing, who has the Silmaril with her, that just fell off the board, which is appropriate because she throws herself into the sea. However, Ulmo takes pity on her and turns her into a bird, and so as a bird she takes the Silmaril to go find Earendil. With the help of the Silmaril, Earendil is finally able to make his way to Valinor, where he goes and pleads before the Valar for the case of humanity and Middle-earth. Because he is a half-elf, he can plead for both men and elves. Finally, the Valar decide to do something about Morgoth's And Eärendil and Elwing, as they prepare for war, are given the choice to either stay mortal or become immortal because they are both half-elf. They both choose immortality, and Eärendil takes his ship and the Silmaril and is thrown up into the heavens, where he becomes a star flying through the night sky. Elwing is given a high tower to sit on, where she can look out at her beloved birds. All of the Valar, joined by the Vanyar elves — no, I am not moving all of them over there because that would take me 20 minutes — storm Morgoth, and Middle-earth is torn asunder. Morgoth's final defense is his army of dragons, but Eärendil himself descends back into the world to throw the greatest dragon and Calagon the Black onto the peaks of Thangorodrim, destroying them completely. Morgoth's forces are decimated. The two Silmarils are retrieved, but they are not given to the Sons of Feanor because why would you do that? However, Maedhros and his brother Maglor desperately want them back. They sneak into a camp of elves waiting to cross over back into Valinor, kill a bunch of elves, and they retake the two Silmarils. However, they are no longer the rightful owners of the Silmarils, and the Silmarils burn them to touch, as Varda had once cursed them to do. And so Maedhros casts himself and his Silmaril into the fire, and he's dead, and Maglor casts his Silmaril into the North Seas, so it's gone forever. And then Maglor wanders around destitute and then eventually dies. The entirety of Middle-earth is restructured, and most of the elves go on back to Valinor to live there forever. However, some elves stay, such as Galadriel, Gil-galad, and Elrond. Our good friend Morgoth is finally cast beyond the walls of time to be chained forever, staring into his own reflection in the void. So he is finally dealt with. However, not all of Morgoth's evil was gone, and Sauron was still at work, and he took on a fair form and went to chat up the elves of Eregion, who still had a hefty amount of Noldor pride. With Sauron's advice, they create the Rings of Power, unaware that in secret he forges a Master Ring. As soon as Sauron creates the One Ring, the elves realize and take their Rings of Power off, but it's too late, because Sauron has already handed out rings to the men and to the dwarves, and they are already being corrupted by the Rings of Power. Meanwhile, following the War of Wrath, which is what that last war was called, the Edain who had helped the elves and Valar fight the war were given a gift in the form of the island of Numenor, which was smack dab in between Middle-earth and Valinor. Along with being able to communicate with the elves and learn crafting and stuff from them, they were also given very long lives. However, very human pride and stubbornness began to bubble up, especially around the fact that despite having longer lives, they were not immortal like the elves. At one point, they capture Sauron and bring him to their island, where he is able to leverage their pride and resentment to go from being a prisoner to an advisor. As an advisor, he gets the whole island worshipping Morgoth, and he convinces Numenor to mount an attack on Aman. They do mount this attack, and it goes horrifically poorly. Their armies are instantly destroyed. Numenor is sunk to the sea, and the only people that survive are people who are still faithful, like Elendil and his son Isildur. Sauron, of course, slinks back to Middle-earth, but he is never again permitted to take on a fair or beautiful form. The survivors from Numenor would go on to establish the human kingdoms of Arnor and Gondor. Sauron eventually chooses to strike out against Elendil, and there is the last alliance of elves and men that strikes back, going for the heart of Mordor. Gil-galad and Elendil sacrifice themselves to weaken Sauron, and Isildur sweeps in to take the ring from him. Elrond and Círdan try to convince Isildur to destroy the ring, but as we all know, he does not, because it's already gotten a bit of a hold on him. However, Isildur dies very soon after in an ambush, and the ring is lost for hundreds of years. An uneasy peace settled, although Arnor continued to be buffeted by orc attacks, and the kingdom slowly dissolved, leaving only a thin scattering of Dunedain rangers in the north. It is during this time that Middle-earth, as so many of us recognize, comes to be. However, there are a few more Maiar spirits who are sent down to protect Middle-earth and to guide it in the coming ages, and these are the white, gray, brown, and blue wizards. Sauron, although humiliated, begins slowly mounting his power and returning, and the ring is found by a most unlikely creature, and well, you know the rest. That's time. That's time. Was that 30 minutes? I don't know what just happened. My brain feels like a sponge, and I think that as soon as this video ends, I am gonna wring all this information out of it, and then I'm gonna know nothing at all about anything. So I really hope that you guys enjoyed this. I hope you learned something, and I really, really hope this came in somewhere around the 30-minute mark. I've been down here for hours, and I need to get out of this basement. So like, subscribe, comment if you've ever read the Silmarillion and what your favorite character is in the Silmarillion if you have read it, and send this video to someone who should read the Silmarillion who hasn't, who will be very confused by everything that just happened in this video. Thank you so much for joining me this week, and I hope that you have a very happy, hobbity day.